Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. On today's show, Cuba and U.S. relations. Our guest, Arnold August, political scientist, speaker, one of the foremost experts on Cuba and author of his new book, Cuba U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. Arnold August, a warm welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Arnold, what is the most relevant issue that your book reveals?
The most relevant issue, I believe, is that with regards to Cuba U.S. relations or U.S. policy towards Cuba, over the years, going back many years, going back even towards 18th century from the beginning, there has been what I would call in the main continuity. That is, the U.S. government has always tried in one way or the other to get Cuba into the realm of the U.S. sphere of influence. This is the overall basic policy. Of course, there has been changes. We've seen some recently, Obama and then Trump. But I believe, and this is documented in that book, that the changes in U.S. policy towards Cuba are secondary in comparison to the continuity, the overall long-standing U.S. desire to take control of Cuba, either openly as a colony, annexing it, or indirectly as it would like to do now.
We hear very little of what's going on inside Cuba.
Yes.
Tell me, after the relations, the reopening of the relations between Cuba and the U.S., is it a monochromatic discussion inside Cuba, or there are many voices that are agreeing and disagreeing with that? And if so, are they, and what they are saying? All the Cubans speak the same language, or is just a version of the government, and inside Cuba, the person of the street, the common person, could differ and disagree with other positions?
I think that's a very good question, because it gets at the heart of my book and what is original in that book. Because, for example, once Barack Obama announced his new policy toward Cuba, when they made that joint statement on December 17, 2014, Barack Obama and President Raúl Castro. Simultaneously on TV, and I guess you and all of us journalists, we were surprised to see it, despite our supposed expertise on Cuba U.S. relations. Was a pleasant surprise, one has to say. Now, one of the main features of my book, and I think it's unique, it really is unique, that it deals with what do in addition to what the Cuban government has to say, in this case with regards to the thaw announced in December 2014, but how, as you're asking, how does a Cuban society react towards that? And I think one of the main features that I try to delineate is, despite what is projected by the mass media, the international media, Cuba is not a homogeneous society. I'm talking politically. Of course, culturally it is. Cubans consider themselves to be a cultural entity, but in terms of political views, ideology, it is not homogeneous. There are different opinions and attitudes. For example, what we were talking about today, the new policy towards Cuba as enunciated by Barack Obama in 2014. Now, I remember when that took place, the main message of Obama at the time, he said that, of course, one has to say outright, I don't want to forget to say this, that I consider this to be very positive, as do my Cuban colleagues on the island, that the open up relations after 50 years and free the rest of the Cuban Fives who were in prison, sent them back home. This was a great event. We were all happy about it, but we have to take into account what did Obama say at the time and what was the reaction of the heterogeneous society in Cuba to what he proclaimed. Obama said that, well, our policy failed. The blockade failed in Cuba, and so we have to make a change. So now some of the media, even not so much in Cuba, to a certain extent some of the official media in Cuba, but especially outside of Cuba, it was mentioned, Obama admitted that the United States was wrong. Well, I believe, Jorge, we have to go into the sentence that he said right after that. He said we were wrong because we did not succeed in our goal of bringing Cuba closer, opening up its political system. And we know, or I know in any case, as well as many Cubans know, that opening up political system means that having a political system which is similar to the American system, that is multi-party system, what they call free and open elections, etc. We did not succeed in bringing Cuba towards that. He also said we did not succeed in bringing Cuba towards what they call open economy. Open economy, in my view, is a euphemism for a market economy, and market economy in turn is a euphemism for capitalism. Thus, we did not succeed in this. Thus, we have to change our tactics in order to succeed with our long-term goal of subverting the Cuban Revolution.
We're talking about April 19 this year.
That's coming up, yes.
Elections in Cuba. Who's going to be the next president?
Who's going to be the next president? Well, to be quite frank with you, I'm in contact. I was in Cuba a short while ago. I had my usual head-to-head discussion with my closest Cuban colleagues who are writers, journalists like yourself, and bloggers, etc., all in the camp of being revolutionary, of course. And they basically are saying to me that it is not officially said that the next president will be Miguel Diaz-Canel, even though he is now the first vice president and thus logically will be the next president, even though he has spoken at important events in Cuba recently. For example, on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Che Guevara in his hometown of Santa Clara. It was he who gave the keynote speech. And even a few weeks ago, when they were celebrating the anniversary of the Third Front in Santiago de Cuba, even though there were a lot of generals there, people from the older generations, the historicals, as they say, he is the one who gave one of the main keynote speeches. So even though the Cubans are light-lipped about it, because their view is, and I agree with them, it's up to the deputies elected on March 11th, who will convene the first new legislature on April 19th, and then vote for amongst the deputies elected who they think should be the president of the Council of State and therefore the head of state of Cuba. So Cubans are, we have to go through the steps, see what the deputies say. But everyone is saying he will be the new president. And you ask me, what do I think? I cannot say that I'm an expert on Miguel Diaz-Canel, but I have been following what he's been doing over the last several years, because he has been vice president for quite a long time now, for close to 5 years. And I have to say I'm quite impressed with regards to him, yeah.
What about Bruno Rodriguez, the actual foreign minister? Is he a possible candidate?
Well, it's pretty late, but once again, a lot of my Cuban colleagues, these are two names that come up all the time. Miguel Diaz-Canel and Bruno Rodriguez.
And one of the visions that some of the experts in Cuba, as you are, have is that Bruno Rodriguez could represent the old guard, and eventually Miguel Diaz-Canel could represent a new chapter in Cuba's history. In the case that Miguel Diaz-Canel takes over the presidency, yes, more opening, changes, any expectation that he's turning a new chapter in Cuba?
I would say he is turning a new chapter in Cuba, because for the first time in the history of Cuba, over 50 years, the president of the country will not have the name Castro in his name, so that he is making history for the first time.
But again, some of the experts say, even though, imagine, Miguel Diaz-Canel takes over the presidency, Raúl Castro will still be the Secretary General of the Communist Party. And there are some readings that believe that it's more influential to be the Secretary General of the Communist Party than to be the president, and Raúl Castro will still have a lot to do in terms of power.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. For example, in addition to what you say, which is very astute comment, he was just nominated a few days ago to be elected as a deputy to the National Assembly. Of course, once he's elected, he will not be presenting himself as a candidate for the Council of State, but unless there's any change, he will actually be sitting as a deputy in the National Assembly when the Assembly meets, and supposedly, for example, Miguel Diaz-Canel is presiding over the National Assembly. Raul will be there, and of course he has the right to speak like any other deputy. The other point that you mentioned is true. He is going to stay on as secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba until its next Congress, will probably be in 2021.
Yeah, about 2 years more.
About 2 years more. He definitely will remain there. Does the Communist Party of Cuba have influence in Cuban politics? Yes, it does. In the very constitution of Cuba, it says that the Communist Party of Cuba is a leading force in Cuban society. So there's no, they're very open about it, and they say that Marxism-Leninism is a leading thinking along with the thinking of Jose Marti. At the same time, they say that the Cuban people, in the Constitution, says that the Cuban people are sovereign. The National Assembly of People's Power and the Council of State, which exercise this power when the National Assembly is not in session, is the main political force of political power in Cuba. So you actually have both the Communist Party and the National Assembly of People's Power and its new president that will be elected on April 18th.
I'll let you know what Peter Kombruk, that you know him, his title, for the audience that is not familiar with him, he's the director of the National Security Archive on Cuba Documentation Project and co-author of the book Back Channel to Cuba, the hidden negotiations between Washington and Havana.
Right.
And he says, this is a quote, we interview him here. There is a struggle in Cuba that is not very much seen between a sector of the Communist Party that realizes that Cuba needs to modernize, open the door to capitalism, and there's another sector that doesn't have that vision. Are we having the chance to see that with Miguel Diaz-Canel is going to be a change in terms of going to that direction, modernize Cuba, open to capitalism or a version of capitalism, and change the pace as of today?
Is this what Peter actually says?
This is a quote.
From him? Okay, well, I have to admit, Peter and William's book is an excellent book, a groundbreaking book with regards to Cuba U.S. relation. I have a lot of respect for it. But if he said that, I have to say respectfully, I do not agree with him. Because there is no indication at all that Miguel Diaz-Canel will make a major change from the long-standing Cuban policy of trying to develop its socialism, despite all of the problems, will carry on to maintain its political system and to improve it, despite the problems that exist in the Cuban political system. There's no indication at all that Miguel Diaz-Canel would lead what some are hoping would be like a reform movement that coincide with American interests with regards to Cuba, that is softening up on its socialist economy, on its political system, and being what they call more flexible towards the United States.
Your book, you're talking in one of the chapters, you're saying that there are challenges for Cuba on 2018 and beyond. What are those challenges?
I think, like speaking right now, I think one of the major challenges will be the increased pressure. Like my whole book deals with the cultural pressures, ideological and political pressures against Cuba, trying to force it to change. You know, change in a sense, become similar to the American model of political and social system. Now, the point is, what is the problem on the horizon? I think we will see that on April 19th.
The day of the election.
The day of the elections, and it's publicly indicated that the new president is, say, Miguel Diaz-Canel. There will be an immediate media pressure on the new president. Now you have no pretext. The Castros, you know, dictators or whatever, the hardcore, they are no longer in power. now you have no choice to make Cuba more democratic, more open up the economy towards a market economy, etc. Not only is it going to take place in April, but it actually started to take place.
It's going on now.
It's going on now, and it's really starting to take place. Well, this is an example of what Peter says. I mean, it's going on now. He's sort of preparing the conditions for an increased attempt to pressure Cuba to change. Now, when Raúl Castro announced in the last session of the National Assembly, Cuba's parliament, back in December 2017, that the elections were postponed. Instead of taking place on February 24th, 2018, they were going to take place on April 19th, 2018. Of course, Miami Herald and others like that, oh, he's trying to hang on to power, which is ridiculous for 2 months hanging on to power. But it started, as you indicated, that whole tendency or narrative started. Now Miguel Díaz-Canel has no choice but to democratize Cuba. Well, democratize Cuba or democratization has different meanings depending who's saying it. When I talk about Cuba and I talk about further democratization, as I do in my second book with regards to the political system, or when the Cubans talk about it, they mean improving their political system. Allow me to give you a clear example of that. When John Kerry raised the American flag in August 2015 in Havana,
reopening the embassy.
Reopening the embassy for the first time after 50 years, and a very important step in Cuba U.S. relations, historic. He gave a very nice diplomatic speech. It was pretty civilized, but he did, of course, mention, I mean, it's in the nature of American politicians to mention this, that Cuba needs a genuine democracy. Now, a press conference took place later on in the day, open press conference in which all journalists were invited. I don't know if you were in Havana at the time, but all journalists were invited from Cuba, United States, etc. And one journalist, Ana Rodriguez, a colleague of yours from Associated Press and a long-time correspondent in Havana, asked Bruno Rodriguez in a very nice way, what do you think about John Kerry's comment regarding genuine democracy in Cuba? And I love Bruno Rodriguez's answer. He said, I'm paraphrasing, of course, he said, well, I'm very comfortable with Cuban democracy. Of course, it has to be improved as part of our updating and improving of our social and economic system. So my point here, when we talk about democratization, myself, other commentators in Cuba, as well as the United States, we're talking about, similar to what Rodriguez is saying, improving it. But when it comes from the United States, even from commentators such as Peter and William Regand, etc., and others, even though I have a lot of respect for them with regards to their analysis of Cuba U.S. relations, they basically seem, maybe I'm wrong, seem to be influenced by the American official thinking that the only real model for democracy and social system is the American model.
And your book, the name of your book, the subtitle, if you want, is Cuba U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. What about beyond? We're talking already Donald Trump. And given the fact that we're talking Cuba U.S. relations, what has happened already with Donald Trump at the helm in the White House, and what do you expect to happen at the continuation of his actual term?
Yes. Of course, when Donald Trump was elected, I was surprised. I was wrong. I thought for sure clearly Hillary Clinton would be elected, and so I was writing the book at the time, and the manuscript, of course, had to be updated to take into account there's a new player in the White House, which obviously did not have the same policy towards Cuba as the previous Obama administration. Now, in my book, I analyze as objectively as possible. Let us look at Trump as a phenomena. He is basically a business person. So I ask, will his business instinct predominate, or would the ideological entourage around him, who are very ideological, such as Marco Rubio, etc., or would they have the influence on Trump that he should forget about his business instinct and get into an ideological battle for Cuba, even though looking at from today, it might seem it's obvious that he's taken up the road of an ideological campaign against Cuba, as we saw on June 16th, 2017, his speech from Miami. And
very hard against Cuba.
Very hard, bringing out all of the cold world terms and ideology against Cuba. It's a dictatorship and lack of a freedom and repression, etc. But despite that, one has to keep in mind, despite that, that he did not close down the embassy in Havana. He did not sever diplomatic relations with Cuba, despite the fact that this was the demand of Rubio.
He tightened the sanctions.
Oh, he definitely tightened the sanctions. He tightened the sanctions with regards to trade and travel. But at the same time, we have to say whether he did this on purpose or not, there are a lot of loopholes in those sanctions. And many travel companies, business people are taking advantage of these loopholes. And I follow the American visits to Havana very closely, and the number of business people from the United States, Republicans and Democrats visiting Cuba since his June 16, 2017 antagonistic announcement has actually seems to be increasing. So that is still there, and even though we will probably agree that Trump is not a brilliant character, but in any case, he's not stupid. I think he knows that if he wants to win the next elections in 2020, if he lasts that long, he has to take into account the following, which I outline in my book. It's the Midwestern states, important producers of grain, voted for Trump, but they want to increase business relations with Cuba. The same goes for other states such as Georgia and Idaho. Then there are important states. Texas, one has to admit that Texas is an important state in domestic and international policy of the United States of America. And I remember very clearly, soon after, within 1 or 2 days after Trump was elected, a Republican member of Congress, his name was Poe, I believe, he wrote a letter to Trump saying, look, if you want to make America great again, we want to increase trade with Cuba. That will help us to increase the employment rate in Texas. And the governor of Texas, important Republican, visited Cuba not long before the Trump victory, and he came back with a very good report on the necessity to increase trade with Cuba.
So Arnold, this is your book, Cuba U.S. Relations, Obama and Beyond. What is the bottom line? So we're going to have a new Cuba, new quote unquote, with last name at the presidency that is not Castro, and here we have a presidency with a last name that is no longer Obama, it's Trump. What to expect?
From the Cuban side, this may surprise you, I believe that after the elections on April 19th, there'll be a resurgence of the revolutionary trend in Cuba. I believe that this will unleash especially the youth, who will bring a new generation of people who are very fervent with regards to the revolutionary movement, very patriotic. And I do not think that will lead to what we call the softening of the stand towards the United States by Cuba, at the same time as they have been doing since 1959, trying everything to develop good relations with Cuba. With regards to Trump, the bottom line, I would say that despite everything, he did not break diplomatic relations. Despite all his rhetoric, there are still almost daily or weekly negotiations going on things of common interest, such as crime, such as drug, such as immigration, both in Washington and D.C. Very respectful talks going on and negotiations going on at this point. So compared to even before Obama, this is very positive and still taking place while Trump is president.
Arnold, congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
And also the new book is going to be published in Spanish under the name of Relaciones Cuba-Estados Unidos, ¿Qué ha cambiado? Good luck and thanks again.
Thank you very much.